Welcome to Arrow's video series on cottage foods. This is the 5th video in the cottage food series. This session will cover ways to minimize liability as a cottage food business. The other videos and more resources can be found at Arrow's website, which is www.aeromt.org. Cottage food businesses, like any other business, have an inherent level of risk in terms of legal liability. In this case, legal liability refers to an instance when a business is held legally responsible for injuring or financially harming another party. Any business's level of risk depends upon the scale and the specifics of the operation. For instance, if you have employees, or company vehicles, etc. But regardless of the size or the operation, all cottage food business have some level of risk for being held liable for injury, particularly in relation to foodborne illness. Arrow will be hosting a free workshop on legal liability for cottage food businesses and other value-added food businesses in November 2021. This workshop will be conducted by Farm Commons, which is an organization that specializes in ag-related legal liability issues. The workshop will be made available for viewing on the Arrow website under the Cottage Food Toolkit. So one of the basic steps in shielding yourself from liability is through your business structure. Unless your cottage food business is structured as a corporation or as a limited liability company, your personal assets are at stake in the event of a lawsuit. This includes equity in your home or your farm, your 401k account, your personal savings, and other financial and personal assets. We suggest that you investigate different business structures with resources from the Montana Secretary of State and consult with a qualified accountant and attorney. The second way to address risk exposure is to choose appropriate insurance. Don't assume that any personal policies cover your cottage food business. It's important to discuss specifics of your business with your insurance agent, and if he or she does not have adequate info, ask for a referral for an agent that has experience with small businesses and/or cottage food production. So business structure and insurance will help shield you in the event of an incident, but the most important aspect of risk management is to reduce your risk of having an issue by following proper food safety protocols. In the 6th video in this series, we address the cottage food registration process. In this video, we discuss how the registration process is tailored to help you and your county sanitarian identify and minimize areas where you might have risk of causing illness. However, cottage food registration itself does not eliminate risk entirely, particularly if standard food safety protocols are not followed. Cottage food products by nature are low risk because they are non-potentially hazardous foods, but preparation and handling practices have similar risks as other food establishments. And in some ways, because cottage foods are made in home kitchens, there might be an increased risk in some regard. So for that reason, it is important that cottage food operators have a general understanding of food safety protocols, so that you can examine your own operation and identify the places where you are most risk of contamination and causing illness. There are many options for food safety trainings. Most courses will focus on restaurants, but the principles apply to cottage foods as well. So the first level of training is known as food handlers. These are often online courses. They focus on hygiene, cross-contamination, and food allergens. They're generally inexpensive, $10 to $20. They're about 90 minutes of content, And they're a good resource, particularly if you have employees or other people working in your operation, although they are fairly limited in content. The second level of training is often known as a manager training. This is a more in-depth course. It's generally a day or about 8 hours. It can be conducted online. It generally costs $100 to $200, and it results in a certification after successful passing of an exam. There are also cottage food specific food safety trainings. These are required in some states, but not in the state of Montana. They often include the same principles involved in other food safety courses, but generally focus more in depth on the ones that are applicable to cottage foods. For instance, working in home kitchens, packaging, transportation, and labeling. These courses are often conducted online and are not limited to residents of the host state. Because cottage food regulation differs from state to state, not all of these courses would be applicable to Montana, but they are still a very good resource for those seeking cottage food specific trainings. So our guest today is Laura Finley. She is a registered cottage food operator in Montana. She has also worked as a county sanitarian, and she currently teaches food safety trainings. So with us today, we have Laura Finley. So thank you for being here. Laura, can you start by telling us about your background and about your businesses?
Yeah, so thanks for having me, by the way. I'm fairly kind of an interesting combination of backgrounds. I have kind of a long history in food and beverage, starting from when I was 15, landing me where I am at 35, so 20 years in food and beverage. I spent a good portion of those years as a sanitarian in a couple different counties. I worked in Missoula County, Gallatin County, did a little bit of work in Park County. And when I left doing that, I even before leaving that, actually, I started Cottage Food, which was a cupcake business, cupcake and wedding cake business that kind of morphed into just a cupcake business. But I do actually hold a cottage food registration. I also hold a retail food license. I didn't mention that before, and a wholesale license, but I don't utilize them very much. And then since, life happens and I still do the cottage food a little bit, but mostly in the last few years, I've just started teaching food safety classes, specifically the Serve Safe Manager classes, the 8-hour courses. And I teach those based out of Bozeman, but I also travel around the state of Montana and soon potentially other states in the country as well. And so I am mostly what I would consider a food and beverage consultant now. We have a business, my husband and I, called Finley Food and Beverage Consulting, and we teach the 8-hour manager classes as well as offer assistance with cottage food applications and retail food applications. Basically anything that a restaurant would need help with, we are there to help them with that. So that's what we do.
That's great. Considering we're talking about cottage foods and food safety and liability, you are a tremendous resource.
You found the right person to talk to.
So from your perspective, from both cottage foods and as a former sanitarian, can you tell us why food safety training is important?
Yeah, I obviously am a strong believer when I teach my classes, I always tell people that I'm kind of like a monotone, not very loud person, but I get really excited and passionate about things. And for whatever reason, food safety is one of those things. I don't know why. That's what I'm passionate about, but I am. I don't have any horror story of getting sick and loving food safety, but I should come up with one. So anyways, food safety from a cottage food standpoint, I think is extremely important for a variety of reasons. I mean, food safety just in your kitchen, you know, as a mother, father, whoever is important. But in a cottage food situation, you know, you're preparing food for the public. And so now you're liable if you get somebody sick, which for me, when I first started, was actually really scary. I was just afraid that I would make somebody sick. And especially, I think, as a former sanitarian, I understood how just the tiniest thing, you know, could get someone sick. So food safety training, there's a few different types, you know, whether it's a 4-hour training through ServSafe or the 8-hour manager course that I teach. Either one provides the basics of things, you know, even chefs that take the class that I teach who come in like, I know everything you're going to teach, that kind of thing. They leave usually saying, I learned something today. I didn't realize that. You know, there's when you go through a food safety training, you learn the basics of the difference between washing and sanitizing, the process of wash, rinsing, and sanitizing. We go through, in the 8-hour course, we go through the approved sanitizers that you can use in the kitchen. We also go through, you know, this doesn't really apply to cottage food because cottage foods don't allow like the cooking of meats and stuff, but the 8-hour class does go through all of the cooking temperatures for chicken, meat, blah, 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 all that stuff. And in a way, actually, you know, it does tie in to cottage foods because, for example, excuse me, you know, I never really thought about this before, but one of the things that we go over in the food safety training is like the proper storage of how to store meats in your refrigerator and stuff. And in a cottage food where you're storing food that you're going to sell to the public, potentially nearby the food that you're going to serve to your family, it is very important to not have eggs on top of something that is ready to eat, or, you know, raw chicken nearby your cake or something like that. And so there's a lot of things that you can take from a food safety training that will be very helpful on a day-to-day basis in a cottage food operation, just for making sure everything runs smoothly, making sure nobody gets sick, and then in the end, protecting you from, you know, something bad. We'll just say that.
Great.
That.
Yeah, I think it seems like because people don't necessarily come with a background in food safety, and because we have this heightened risk of using our home kitchen space, it seems like those two are a really important combo.
Yeah, and so you know, one of the things about cottage food that's just kind of an interesting dynamic, I'm a member of a lot of Facebook groups and stuff, and some people who start, you know, I always think of it as a bakery, but of course there's cottage foods that are spices and all sorts of stuff. You know, people are so creative, but some people work in a bakery and they want to leave and go do their own thing, right? And they kind of know the rules and they transfer that into their home kitchen. And that's kind of like easiest scenario into cottage food, right? But there's a lot of people who leave their careers of, you know, whatever it was that they did for the last 20 years, and they've never stepped foot in a commercial kitchen, and they really don't know the difference between cleaning and sanitizing. And so, you know, I almost wish there was kind of like a 4-hour, you know, a requirement for cottage food operators to at least take a 4-hour food safety training, because, you know, we're allowing people, and I'm all about cottage food, but we're allowing people to sell food out of their home kitchen with who knows what experience or knowledge. And then we're also adding in like the day-to-day of what happens in home kitchens, which is like kids, dogs, roosters, who knows, you know, just crazy chaos, right? And so the more knowledge you can put in somebody's head about not only the risks involved in what could happen if you make somebody sick, but then the training involved in how to avoid somebody getting sick. You know, it's really, these trainings, even if they're not required, are just an asset to the operator to protect them. So, and they're kind of fun if you take them from me. So
great. I think you've answered most of my questions. Is there anything else you'd like to share with cottage food operators?
You know, the only other thing I think that we talked about previously, you know, outside of this discussion was just, you know, I think again, that's just riding home you already know I want food safety training, right? So that's a given. But you know, when I teach the 8-hour manager class to restaurant operators, I tell them, you know, kind of in the beginning, that it's important that we learn this information and learn it well and retain as much as possible so that when things get crazy in, say, a commercial setting, we can do as best as we can to not cut corners, right? And the same thing goes for at home. And honestly, I think it may be, I won't want to say worse, but it may be worse in a home kitchen when we cut corners, because there's a lot of other factors involved in a home kitchen that would not be in a commercial setting, you know? So like, I don't want to throw myself under the bus, you know, but it's like, say have a cupcake order and it's due tomorrow and I'm staying up late, but I also need to make dinner for my family. So I'm cooking steak over here and making buttercream over here and the dog's over here and the baby's over here. You know, that's almost, in my opinion, like more risky than just a commercial kitchen that doesn't allow non-employees in the kitchen, right? And so I think, you know, whether the operators feel like they need a training or not, I think I would just emphasize the importance of trying to make your product in a contained space. Like for me, and I won't try to talk too long about this or anything, but one of the things I talk about too is how I try to do one task, you know, isolated from other tasks. So if I'm making buttercream, which is ready to eat, I do that on a separate day than I'm making cupcakes that have raw egg in the batter, you know, and just separating them and trying to keep things in as much of a controlled environment as you can at home, right? And so, and then coming from somebody who teaches serve safe multiple times a month and has been a sanitarian, I try to do this the best as I can, and I still fall short. And so for the people who don't even have the food safety training knowledge and are just kind of winging it and don't even know the risks, you know, that would be a concern for me. And so I hope that people will watch this, you know, and kind of understand that they do need to protect themselves, and food safety training is a great way to do that.
Great. Well, thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.